welcome to Nerd Social. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Kendra.
Hi, so we're going to talk about Star Trek Discovery Season 4, Episode 1, the premiere. So, as usual, what we're going to do is give our spoiler-free thoughts about the episode, and then we'll jump into spoilers. Before we do that, I will say that I'm going to read a summary in the spoiler-free part, so if you don't want to know anything about the episode, then maybe come back whenever you can actually see the episode to join the discussion. The spoiler-free summary from Paramount is, after months spent reconnecting the Federation with distant worlds, Captain Mike and Burnham and the crew of the USS Discovery are sent to assist a damaged space station, a seemingly routine mission that reveals the existence of a terrifying new threat. Kendra, what did you think of the first episode of Star Trek Discovery? Spoiler-free, of course.
Spoiler-free. Oh, wow. I enjoyed it. They've been on missions that we don't see, find out how many worlds they've reconnected the Federation with, doing what Starfleet does. That's exciting. And out of one fire into a new one. I thoroughly enjoyed the episode. We saw all of the characters that we left at the end of season 3 are back, and just excited to see what they do for this season. I don't know how much more. I feel it's hard to...
Yeah, it takes some practice to talk around the episode without spoiling plot points. But yeah, I like the episode as well. I will say that the episode, without spoiling the specifics, has Sonequa Martin Green front and center, as she should be as the new captain.
Let's fly.
David Ajala as Cleveland Booker plays a significant role at the beginning and the end of this episode, but mostly the episode revolves around the mission that I outlined in the summary. And if you've seen any of the trailers for the season, we have the introduction of a new character for the season who is the Federation president. So this character plays a significant role in this episode as well. How exactly is a little bit too spoilery, but similar to how people thought that Oded Fehr was going to be a villain last season as Admiral Vance, this new character adds some tension to the proceedings of the episode. But yeah, the CGI in the show is also always awesome. The rest of the supporting cast didn't have as much to do, but this is just the first episode, resetting and showing where Burnham is now as the captain of the ship. And we get a little bit of Saru in this, where we left him last season. He was going back to Cmdr, and we get a bit of an update on where he is and what he's doing as well.
So you see why they've advanced since he left.
Yeah, that was really cool to see, because I think last season we did get a little bit of Cmdr, but it was just them on a hill. You didn't really get to see any of the society, and you actually get to see some of the society and how Cmdr has advanced in the last 930 years, which is cool.
And the two
Yeah, we can delve into the specifics of that when we get into the spoiler stuff. All right, because this episode in particular is a little bit too difficult to talk about without spoiling. Spoilers ahead. Before we get into it, if you enjoy the conversation, please subscribe. It's the only way that the algorithms actually know that we exist. So thanks for that. All right. The very beginning actually has nothing to do with this summary of them helping the space station. It's one of those cold opens on a weird planet where you see a lot of Star Trek episodes actually start with that, and actually some movies as well. I think the second Star Trek Star Trek Beyond, I think Kirk is doing something on some weird planet, and then there's like an eruption or something like that. So it's similar to that. So Burnham is trying to negotiate with this planet that's been cut off from the Federation for a while. It's called Alshan 4. She's conducting a negotiation with their Emperor Liu, and it's not going well. There's a whole lot of mistrust. There's a whole lot of lost in translation sort of things going on. And
it's not even really a negotiation. She's just, hey, we want to give you this.
Yeah, but they're super suspicious.
They hide and
they're super suspicious.
Yeah, we don't want anything from you, no strings attached. And they're like, no.
It's over 100 years, and apparently like 20 years before the burn, the relationships with the Federation was deteriorating for whatever reason. So even before this Emperor was alive, unless this species is very long-lived, he's grown up knowing that they don't like the Federation. So there's a miscommunication about grudge And they get chased by, as Book calls them, butterfly people, because apparently they can coalesce butterflies around them to make them fly. So they jump into part of Bookship. So like one of the things that I like about Bookship is that he can break into pieces for purposes. But I will say that later on in the episode, it's breaking into pieces for no reason whatsoever. I don't understand the rhyme or reason why it's breaking into pieces. When it was breaking into pieces to do something, I understand, but it seems like it's moving into pieces just because it looks cool. Like maybe the animators think it looks cool. I don't know. This little small shuttle was a cool little addition, and I appreciate that it looks completely different than any of the Starfleet stuff. Although it does have detached nacelles like the Starfleet. So they're getting shot at, and Burnham realizes that they're not hitting them. And then she calls up to the ship and tries to science the heck out of it, as they like to do. So they figure out the planet is off its axis, and they were using satellites to correct that.
So I thought that part was really cool, because now you see Adira is back, and they are so much more confident. They were always confident, but there was less arrogance and more of a partnership between Adira and
Stamets.
Stamets. And that it was great to see that interaction, that light bulbs going off at the same time, and they're still figuring it out, but now everybody's like friendly competition and happy about it, and not just like butting heads the way they were before. So it's nice to see them feel welcomed to the crew of Discovery, really.
Yeah, I really appreciate the addition of Adira, just because it lets Anthony Rapp play different notes for Stamets, because he's not grumpy all the time. Like watching him talk to Adira, and he's playing a little bit of bemusement, because they go off on this tangent about birds, but also pride as well. So seeing him play that instead of gruff all the time is pretty cool. I appreciate it for the actor, and I appreciate it for the show as well. So yeah, Adira figures this out, and the bridge crew, I think that was Oo and the helmsman, Detmer. Yeah, they say that they have satellites set up to correct the shift, and they run on dilithium. So they send some dots to power up the satellites, which corrects the shift, which helps them fly better and also shoot better, to Book's annoyance. So they get to the ship and they leave the dilithium. Although I was actually watching this again earlier today, because I watched it last week, of course, and I was thinking to myself, was there a line explaining why they didn't just transport straight to the ship? I mean, it was a cool action sequence. I'm sure that's why they wrote it that way, but there wasn't anything written to say why they couldn't just transport. Because when they got to the top of his ship, because it was cloaked, they just transported inside. Why couldn't they just transport from where they were? What was their whole chase and everything? Was it just for the action sequence?
Or their sensors, maybe? Because there was a grid, right? Their satellites. I don't know if maybe...
But the satellites weren't working because they were powered down.
Yeah, when they got there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
It's a nitpick. It's not something that actually stood out to me when I first watched it. It was just like, okay, they pissed these people off. They should probably run. And they did. That's immediately what they did. Whereas I guess they could have just transported it immediately.
But is that Starfleet protocol? Because sometimes away missions, they do take a ship instead of just beaming down.
I don't know. So it seemed like the Discovery was outside of the satellite orbits. And I'm not sure what the range is of transporters. So maybe they could have beamed straight down to the surface. But I was just talking about beaming to his ship. If they wanted to get away, they could have just beamed to his ship. But there are a lot of episodes where something is about to happen, and at the last second they get beamed off the planet to be saved. So it's definitely something they could have employed here, but they did show at the very beginning that they took the ship to the planet. But yeah, I don't know why they didn't just beam to the ship. Unless the reason that they took the ship was for the same reason they couldn't beam. There was some kind of interference or whatever. That's usually the only reason that they take a shuttle down in the first place to a planet, is if there's some sort of... They usually like yada yada as like saying ionic interference or something like that, stopping them from them beaming. So I guess that's what was going on. But if that's the case, how do they do a site-to-site transport from the top of the ship inside the ship then?
Yeah, that whole misunderstanding about Book's pet cat being a queen and they're going to rescue the queen.
Yes.
Like, in my head, I'm like, do you really want a pet cat let loose on your planet? Like, your butterflies are just going to decimate the population.
Yeah. Yeah, they were upset. They were first upset that they brought a carnivore. So free the carnivore just because the carnivore is a monarch. Okay.
But it also made me think of all of the episodes in, I guess, throughout very Star Trek series where there's a lot of focus on language and diplomacy and how you phrase things and learning a lot about a culture before you get there to make sure you don't offend anyone or as little as possible, especially when you're making first contact and there's all of this. And I was like, I feel like this is you should have known
Yeah,
that they
it's the
don't.
thing. You're right, and you.
But it just
It's
yeah.
fun. It's funny though because at the beginning of the conversation, it seems like she was being very careful, and she said no strings attached, and then she would explain that it was an idiom, and he was like, "We're familiar with the idiom." So maybe Lucifer language after that, because she assumed that they were more familiar, and then maybe he knew that idiom, but a lot of other things, apparently cats and things like that, he didn't know. So
He didn't.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So they get back to the ship, and then he sends a message to her and says, "You didn't have a very pleasant visit. Why did you leave the dilithium?" And basically, we're Starfleet. That's what we do. Is what she says. And then we actually get her at the end of the stinger at the beginning. We get her saying, "Let's fly." I actually like the delivery here. It was far more natural than it was at the end of the season. So yeah, it's growing on me. It's not engaged yet because I have heard engaged several times over the original run of the show and also rewatching TNG over and over again. But yeah, so we get two scenes after that. Kaminar, as we mentioned, is the scene right after the credits and the Kelpian Council, where the Baul are represented on the outside because they're sea creatures. They live in the water, so they to coexist. This actually made me think of the Zendi. I'm not sure if you watched any of the Star Trek Enterprise show. So the Zendi were a race that attacked Earth, and they had 4 different species of intelligent life on their planet.
Yep.
So yeah, so they found some way to coexist, basically by attacking other people, but they had the external threats to coalesce them. But it seems like they found a way to coexist on Kaminar. Su'Kal is telling the council that they should join the Federation. They should use the gift of dilithium because apparently they were also gifted with dilithium from the Federation to explore. And there's a conversation inside the council about we can also use this dilithium to power some things here on Kaminar. And then Saru gives a speech about, yes, we should work to make Kaminar better, but that if you think of our world as our home, that's great. Our home is just one of many inside of our galaxy. So it was actually a pretty good speech, and it was actually very well delivered by Doug Jones. I really appreciated that little touch point. And that coupled with the scene that we see later on where Su'Kal is basically pushing him to go back. I think he is going to end up becoming a captain of a ship, and it's probably going to be the Voyager because we know pretty much know Burnham's not going to get the Voyager. Right. So I think that's what they're going to do with Su'Kal later on in the season. But he had basically one episode on Kaminar. He's going to be back in Starfleet in the next episode because if you see the previews for next week, he's already on the Discovery traveling around investigating the anomaly that took out Kwok-Choon, I guess, later on. So yeah. Then we skip over to Starfleet Academy, where Burnham is opening up Starfleet Academy after 125 years of it being closed with new cadets, and she introduced the antagonist of this episode and maybe the antagonist of the season, the newly elected president of this federation.
And now, please allow me to introduce our special guest, the new president of the Federation, Lara Rilek.
She is played by Chelah Horsdal. So she is half Cardassian and half. Sorry, she's not half Bajoran. That math doesn't work out. She's partially Bajoran, she's partially Cardassian, and she's partially human. That's how the producers of the show explained her. Sort of to show the progress in that part of the space as well, wherever Deep Space Nine is. I think it's actually in the Beta Quadrant because that's why it was a Deep Space station. So I think it's in the Beta Quadrant. So to show the progress over the last 1,000 years in that region of space, because I think they also did a little featurette showing that half Bajoran, half Cardassian children were shunned by both societies. So the fact that she is not only half Bajoran or partially Bajoran, partially Cardassian, but they're also part of the Federation is also interesting. A lot of progress in the last 900 plus years. Yeah. So she gives a speech, and they also open up a new space dock, which is named after Archer, the captain from the Enterprise. And they actually use a music cue from that show, which is pretty cool. Also, she also mentions the Voyager and the fact that they're testing new propulsion systems in addition to like prototype spore drives. I forget the name that she used for a new propulsion system. I'll look it up. But that's the first time we actually hear about the new propulsion, which I guess we'll see later on in the season. I think this is the first that we've seen of new propulsion in a while, except for like just last week, the same day when they released Star Trek Discovery, they also released a episode of Star Trek Prodigy. I'm not sure if you're watching that Nickelodeon show, but they have a new propulsion system that they dropped in that episode as well, based upon like a drive that is encircling a protostar. They haven't explained how that was created or when that was created, but interested to hear more about that. So anyway, the president says that she wants to join Burnham on this mission because they get a distress call from Deep Space Repair. Beta 6 is the name of the station. So they're having issues. They go out to help them on the space station, but the president wants to tag along, and Burnham thinks that she's doing it for political reasons, to check a box to say that she's seen action or whatever. We find out that is not why she went. But yeah, she's super annoyed. Even before she decided to come along, she was annoyed that she was going to be at the Starfleet Academy presentation. I guess they haven't really established that she doesn't like politicians, but I guess this is a new aspect of her personality. She doesn't like politicians. But
yeah, it seems odd to me because it would seem natural, right, for your class of cadets. Not a lot. You're restarting Starfleet, so it wouldn't be surprising to have the president of the Federation there for the inaugural class. So yeah, she was just weird. Struck me as just weirdly antagonistic.
Yeah.
But also, so what if you want to check that box? That's a pretty small box to check, I think.
Yeah, I guess so. But I think she also thinks that she's going to get in the way. And she is the president, and she can take the ship from her. She can countermand her orders, because I would assume, and
maybe, I guess, I was going to say, a sense that the crew of Discovery is actually going to these places and reinitiating that contact. Excuse my dog. But yeah, reinitiating that contact. Yeah. And doing that hard work of re-engaging with various planets and civilizations. So that's probably, and then you send in the politicians.
Yeah, she thinks that she's just going to get in the way. Actually, when they get there, there's a bit of an issue with the station like flying off its axis for some reason. Mm-hmm. We don't know why until later on why it's flying off its axis, but they have to match the rotation of the station so they can beam Adira and Tilly on to help out. They need some programmable matter, so they go over. It's a little weird. They didn't explain, like in the transportation, they actually changed their outfits.
But I guess you can do that now, because they do it multiple times. Because even when Michael Burnham beams across, like she went through, I think, 3 really quick changes when she into her suit, which I thought was impressive. But if you can you're already like transporting, you're like breaking somebody down into.
Yeah, I guess you can put different clothes. You can put different clothes on them. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, they're. And
I think the clothing itself is probably, so when she was hit by was it meteorites, and her little
something frozen, something or another. Yeah.
The suit automatically activated, protective gear essentially. Yeah. So you're seeing it, but that's pretty cool that they've developed like materials and tech that can just like change and be multifunctional and sense and stuff, like, apparently. But yeah, I noticed that. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it's also, so like, I noticed that they didn't even comment on it, but there's a little beat where Adira and Tilly transport from the deck, the bridge, straight there. Mm-hmm. And they have different clothes on, and when they look down, there's a little beat where Adira's looking down, like in amazement that they're wearing something different. So they don't really comment on it, but there's a little beat there. So that's interesting. Yeah. I guess they're not necessarily going to address it, because you can see what happened. It looks like a continuity issue, but I think the director told the actor to do that little beat so you can see that there is some disorientation. But I thought it was pretty cool. And also, like you said, later on when Burnham has to go and try to remove the debris, her suit kicking was also pretty cool. Although, you see, I guess that would be different technology. Maybe it was more of some of the programmable matter sort of stuff that would.
What it is, it's all programmable matter. I don't know, because when she gets back to the ship, that she also has she's back into her, I guess, bridge uniform.
Yeah. Speaking of, now this is the fashion portion of the conversation. Oh, at the very beginning, the jacket that she wears. So like, Picard had a really cool like jacket when he did away missions, but I really like her jacket as well. The leather captain's jacket. I guess it's captain's prerogative to look the coolest on the ship. I like his jacket was probably the best design in the TNG era, but now I like her jacket. It looks pretty cool.
Yeah, it looks like they have a few like very different official uniforms, right? Because there's the uniform they were wearing to welcome in the new cadets.
Yeah, that was the dress uniforms. Yeah,
and now they have away mission uniforms.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'll be curious to see. So they seem to put like a lot of thought into how they look, and I guess sort of distinguishing like bridge from away from. I feel in the older versions, like the dress uniform was almost just like a longer version of the regular uniform. Like it was distinct, but it was still just a riff on the same.
Yeah.
The same
yeah,
thing.
I think that the costume designer is doing something a little bit different with the dress uniforms than they did in the TNG era. Because like you said, it was just basically a long tunic, but the regular duty uniforms, they're not a long tunic, but they're a long, and it's like a long shirt. So just making it longer wouldn't be much of a design difference. So I think she went a completely different way for the dress uniforms. So that's a really cool job to have. I guess the people making all the gadgets and things like that is a cool job too. But you can actually see how many looks she had to come up with, her and her team had to come up with, and they're all very cool. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, do you think, I'd have to watch the episode again, do you think that the reason that they changed over to the new uniforms, or the uniforms in the away mission, Tilly and Adira, is because what they transported over with was similar to what Burnham had on. So if the space station lost compression or something like that, they would be protected with a spacesuit or something like that. I think that's probably why, because she wasn't in a spacesuit when she was talking to the butterfly people, but they transported over in a very specific situation where the space station was already out of control, and they could have at any moment been jettisoned out into space.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, like it was probably like situation specific. Like you need something that can do a little bit more should, I don't know, things go haywire.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So where were we in the recap here? They beamed over. They speak to Commander Nallus, I think his name is. Yeah, Commander Nallus, who's the commander of this space station. He's very hesitant about them touching his systems. And I saw someone say this, and you know what? This makes more sense than in previous episodes of Star Trek, where the only competent people are the people that show up, like the people that we're seeing on the main ship. You're like, everyone's part of the Federation. Everyone should be competent enough. So like, he actually has been running the systems on this station. He probably would have a better idea of how it works than the people showing up. All he asked for was programmable matter. He didn't ask them to fix his problem. So I understood him from that point of view. He did lose his cool later on and wanted to go on a suicide mission. Again, from his point of view, he was going to go on a suicide mission to save his people, and they had to talk him down to not do that. It didn't end up well for him anyway. So
yeah, that was unfortunate. And that moment where the president of the Federation is talking to him, calming him down and saying, "Don't you want to return to your home?" and describing it, like beautifully describing it as if she had been there herself. And then Michael afterwards is like, "Were you telling him the truth?" And she's like, "Does it matter?"
Yeah.
And like I wasn't sure how to feel about that, because part of me is like, well, it matters. You know, I want to know, like, the strategy worked and the strategy made sense, but it was a manipulation, right? She was manipulating his feelings to get him to not hurt anyone, but her sort of not wanting to give Burnham any insight into her strategy. I don't know, it didn't win her any points from me. And I could see, like, it just added to an already antagonizing relationship that they seem to have.
Yeah. I see what you're saying, but I see it both ways. In various points in this episode, Burnham was right, but the president wasn't wrong.
Right.
So when the president questions whether or not she should be leaving the ship in the middle of an emergency, Burnham is right. She has the most EV experience, and it's a very difficult situation. She has to fly this ship over to this space station, which is still tumbling through space. It doesn't look like it, but because they've matched the rotation on their ship, but it's still, the ship is still tumbling through space. So she has to fly over to this other platform while it's tumbling through space, and she has the most experience. That's true. But she is also the captain of the ship, and she has other priorities besides this particular mission.
You're quite right. It's like you should have people on your crew who can also do this.
Yeah, so the president isn't wrong, even though Burnham is right. And again, in the conversation about manipulating the guy, whether or not she traveled to this planet, that conversation would have been exactly the same, and the intent would have been exactly the same, to manipulate him into doing what she wanted him to do. So the fact that she was reading his file, which is what she was doing, you can see in the scene, like, she was reading the file. She was reading the file. The fact that she was reading the file is irrelevant, because neither case, whether or not she went there or not, the purpose of her saying that was to manipulate him into calming down.
Oh yeah. That, I think, like, in her not willing to be open with Michael about her strategy. Because if we go into a difficult situation together, I want to know what approaches are you going to take. If you're open to deceiving people, okay, I maybe want to know that you're open to deceiving people, like match your play or whatever. So I think to me, it showed Michael that she was probably willing to be deceptive to achieve. And again, it's like, in that situation, that's the right move, right? Like you said, whether or not she's been there, right? You just want this person to calm down. I don't think it got Michael to trust her anymore. And I don't know if she could have said things or said it any differently to be like, I got your back. But that ultimately, that was like, or I got your people's back.
She was trying to help, and she was also helpful.
Yeah, right.
And
maybe Michael shouldn't be scared. I don't know. But I just thought it was just like an interesting exchange between the two of them. That's just gonna exacerbate their relationship.
Sure. I don't know. I feel even though I can see where Michael is coming from, but I think it was overly antagonistic given the fact that it worked, and regardless of whether or not she went there or not, the purpose of it would have been to manipulate him either way, to stop him from killing himself. So maybe, as you're saying, she just wanted to see what kind of person she was, and the president was like, who cares? This is not really important. The purpose was like to stop him from doing something stupid. Who cares about the details? I understand where Burnham is coming from, but also, like I said, the president's not wrong. That's not the most important thing right now. Who cares how we got to this outcome? Yeah. So
discussion they have after about when she's, Burnham's not going to be the person to test this experimental drive. And Burnham's, I guess, upset about it, but also, like you said, like, the president is not wrong. I think she wants somebody that she can
trust. Yeah, that she can someone that she can trust to be more even keeled than Burnham has demonstrated that she is. And I appreciated this conversation for a couple reasons. Like, this episode was good on action, but also good on the talky stuff that I like. So at the end, we get a mention of Kobayashi Maru, which is the name of the episode, which I forgot to mention at the very top when I was introducing this. Kobayashi Maru, who for people who are familiar with Star Trek, came up with Kirk. So infamously, Kirk beat the Kobayashi Maru test by basically reprogramming it. So it's supposed to be like a lose-lose situation where you have to make a decision of short-term pain or for a long-term benefit, and Burnham didn't pass the test.
Never gets easier. Kobayashi Maru. Commanding from a place of personal need places others in harm's way. Today, you were prepared to sacrifice the many to save the few. Everyone could have died.
But they didn't.
One day they might.
This wasn't really a test that the president put in front of her. She just wanted to observe her, and a situation that presented itself where Burnham didn't really pass. So I found this interesting on a lot of different levels. Like, Burnham is a contemporary of Kirk. And the way that Starfleet was run during Kirk's time in a cowboyish way is not the same way that the Federation was run during Picard's time, which is more diplomatic and more contemplative. The president saying, and you got to think that between Kirk and Picard was only 200 years, and it's been like 930 years. So maybe they're even more circumspect about being cowboys than Picard was. So yeah, I understand what she was saying. Like, you are a hero. Undoubtedly, you're a hero. You saved our galaxy, and you and your team also got us to reconnect, figured out the burn. But yeah, those are big swings. You're a big swing person. There's not a whole lot of subtlety to you, and we need more subtlety.
I lead to bring everyone home.
Leadership is about balance.
Your acts of bravery are huge swings of the pendulum. And there is a very fine line between a pendulum and a wrecking ball.
The sense that I get is that inside of a Federation, there's probably a lot of captains, and there are a lot of captains probably like Burnham who are still maturing as captains. But the sense that I get is that the Voyager is going to be the flagship, just like the Enterprise was the flagship of the fleet. And she's trying to figure out who's going to be the captain of the flagship ship. And Burnham's not there yet. And I think I agree with her.
I think, you saying that, but I think like the Federation is trying to rebuild itself. So it's not, and I think looking at themselves as the organization that was built over the course of how many hundreds of years is maybe not the best approach to take, because you're reconnecting with all these worlds that you lost. Maybe you're not all the way back in those like cowboy days, but you're not back to what you used to be. So there's like a middle ground, and I think there should be an expectation that you probably need a little bit of both. And particularly since they don't mention anything about the Emerald Chain in this episode, but who knows? Like, you're still sort of rebuilding and building. And so I think you're still going to need, and I think as we see at the end of the episode, you're still going to need people willing to sort of swing bait, burn up.
Yeah, I think that her skills are necessary. I think that her promotion was right. They need people like Burnham in the Federation for all the reasons that you listed. Like you said, the galaxy is still in shambles. We talked about this when we did the season review, that a lot of the galaxy is more like Star Wars, like the Outer Rim planets disconnected. So yeah, given the circumstances and the setting that the Federation is in, we definitely need someone like Burnham. But as a bridge to where they want to be, they maybe someone who's more even-tempered, or who I don't even say that she's not even-tempered, who can make hard decisions about like losing people if they need to, is what they need to bridge to where they want to be. I think Burnham can get there. And I also appreciate that even though she has the captain chair, the writers are committed to showing that even captains can continue to grow. And I think that they're going to show her growth over the season as well. Because I think people complain a lot about this character for lots of reasons that we discussed in the season review that we did. But I think it's far more interesting to show the growth of leadership and how someone grows into leadership, and they're not just like a born leader, because that's fantasy. And it's far better writing to show how people grow into leadership. And we're seeing that even though she, like in the first episode of the first season, she was a leader, but she's a much better leader now than she was in that episode. Because she's like second in command of a Starfleet ship. So she was a leader, but she was far less of an effective leader than she is now. And to the president's point, maybe she has some room to grow as well. And maybe over the course of the season, the president will also come to value her approach more than she does right now. I think she definitely values it, because her like she said, her results are undeniable, but maybe they'll meet somewhere in the middle over the course of the season. So yeah, that's pretty much the end of the episode, except for so I haven't mentioned book, because like I said at the beginning, they do this scene where he goes to Kwok-Choon to his godsons, like manhood ceremony, and they have this tree of life, coming of age ceremony. And there's this tree of life where they're all connected, and they're supposed to wear this sap around their neck. And for some reason, Book doesn't have his sap, and he's asked why he doesn't have the sap, and he said, I guess that's a conversation for another day. But at the end of this episode, in the middle of that, there's a bunch of birds, and Book goes to investigate. Like the birds are freaking out, and he's knocked off course. Discovery comes and meets him, and Kwok-Choon has basically been destroyed. Like, it's moved from its orbit, and any planet moving from its orbit is an extension level event. That's a lot of force on a planet. Yeah. So even though the rock,
like 11, I think it's 11,000 kilometers. Where she expand her search, and that was just I guess season 3, like every episode took you through a range of motions, right? And this was no different. Like that end where you see like this whole planet is destroyed, and that realization like on everybody's faces, like the shock and just like what is happening, because it's not that you can tell it's not the act of, it's not intentional, right? There's no person or persons behind it. This is
like a force of nature, and
a force of nature is terrifying. And I guess maybe that's our villain for this season. But it's no when we find it out. But it's just like
so that they wrote this during the pandemic, and I think that's basically what there's this existential thing that we can't control, and there's all this uncertainty about it, and I think that's what they were writing about, and that's what they're going to have to deal with. How do you make decisions in a time of uncertainty with some existential threat? And I think that's what they're going to grapple with the entire season, and we'll see how they deal with it. And hopefully the writers of this show have some good answers, because we need those answers, because we're still dealing with that in our...
Yeah, like you just saw, like you had this moment where you thought Book was like he's been reconnecting with his family, like hopeful that maybe Kwok-Choon would have some sort of role in
the Federation. We talked about them being maybe the navigators of the spore drives, but
I was like, nope, like just whole planet just gone. They can't, like, eager to see like how this, and I think like it's a moment, right, to Saruch where he was talking about we can see our home as just Cmdr, or we can see it as our solar system, or we can see it like he kept widening.
Yeah, our galaxy, which is
our galaxy. Like this is that moment, because we don't know now, but potentially anybody could be at risk for this threat, and so we do all need to come together and figure this out and stop any future destructions. So yes, it's definitely going to test the Federation. Who gets help, right? Where is this phenomenon going to show up next?
Yeah, they're already trying to build trust. So there's going to be mistrust about, we had to deal with the burn. You say that
that you caused, right? That your explorers, Federation explorers caused, and now there's this, like what?
Yeah. So it should be very interesting this season. I don't think there's going to be a personal, like an antagonist. Like for the last couple seasons though, there has been I was going to say existential threat, but the burn was an existential thing. But the last season wasn't really about the burn, and it wasn't really about Osira either. It was about reconnecting and connection. The season before that was sort of about the threat of AI, which I guess you could say is an existential threat, but it's not like a force of nature. So it's like a self-inflicted threat.
Right.
And then the first season was the war. So maybe they want to keep away from like making an entire season about a person or a threat like that. So maybe that's why they chose this existential thing. So I'm interested to see what they make out of this and how they make it different than the last couple seasons where they were just trying to figure out what's going on. Because even though this seems like a naturally occurring thing, whereas the burn ended up not being a naturally occurring thing, and the AI threat definitely wasn't a naturally occurring thing, there definitely was a mystery box element to both of those seasons, and they're doing it again, which could go fine or could get repetitive and boring, and they might do the same beats over and over again. So we'll see, because they definitely have to use their knowledge and try to figure out what's going on. So we'll see. Yeah. Any final?
On a lighter note, did you notice the triple?
Yes, I did notice the triple. I did notice the triple. So I guess in the last 900 years, or maybe they figured out a way,
like exponentially.
Yeah, figured out a way for them not to be born pregnant.
Yeah.
So I saw the triple. So I guess they figured that out. The Tribbles can just walk around without becoming an ecological disaster. I don't know. It's 1,000 years is a lot of time. Yeah. Yes, I saw the Tribble. That was definitely a cute little highlight. I didn't actually know it was a Tribble until I rewatched it, and so I just thought it was just some animal. But yeah, it's definitely a Tribble. It's supposed to be a Tribble. So yeah, that was pretty cool. Any other notes before we wrap up? We can talk about it for about an hour now. Any final thoughts?
No, just really curious. I want to see more of the bridge crew. We saw O and Mer when they were trying to match the rotation of the space station, that interplay. But just in general, like seeing everybody more settle into their roles on this new discovery. Yeah, I'm excited. I thought it was a good opener.
Yeah, it's a really good. I don't think that they've had every single season, even though some of the seasons have been uneven. Their first episode is pretty awesome. Like last season, the season 2, season 1, every single season they've had a really good opener, and maybe that's because they spent the most time trying to crack the season, so they maybe spend the most time on that episode. But yeah, they've had a good episode every season. The first episode. The other thing that I didn't mention is that we got a little bit of conversation before Adira was transported over to the space station between Adira and Gray. So we see a little bit of Gray, and we get a little bit of a nod to the fact that Gray is going to get a body at some point. So that's something else that we're going to deal with this season as well at some point.
But yeah, so it sounds like they've figured some things out, because they were like we incorporate into a body is how they phrased it, or something like that. And I guess maybe everybody knows about Gray, because you saw them talking to Gray, but then when they sort of out and Gray's no longer there, Adira is still talking. And I'm like, does everybody know that she's still? Do they know she's talking to Gray? I hope so.
I think at this point they know that they're not crazy. They know that that Gray is there, so they just assume that they're talking to Gray. So yeah. Burnham acknowledged, like, she looked over her shoulder and was like, oh, and then her attention went back to what she was thinking about. It was just, I think she clocked it, but it wasn't anything weird to her, because they probably at this point know that Adira has Gray in their head.
Yes, I'm curious to see how Gray gets a body as well.
I'm also curious to see whether or not they could be separated. Okay, Gray has a body, but can Gray be out of the proximity of Adira ever? Are they going to be sharing a mind, even though their bodies will be separate? I'd be interested to see that. Like, does Adira and Gray connected forever, regardless of whether or not Gray has a body of his own? So, yeah. Well, we are interested to hear what you guys think. So please comment down below to join the conversation. Like and subscribe to get more content like this. And we will see you next time. Bye, guys. Thanks.